instead of continuing to explore.
Oh, yeah.
And then I had to look back at Blackboard to see why did I think that. And what I did is I jumped down to week 4 deadlines, which say digitize your alphabet, edit and refine as needed, but keep your original intention and ideas in mind. And I think I completely overlooked that paragraph in the section above it, which talks about like pushing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I apologize.
No, you don't have to apologize. I mean, keep in mind, and this is for everybody, this whole process is sort of pushing, evolving, adjusting, making changes. I mean, that's design in a nutshell. I mean, you rarely hit your first initial idea and then you just execute it and it works. Like you constantly, so don't think about it as like, oh, I'm misread. It's okay. Because funny enough, you're going to encounter this alphabet for the next 4 weeks. So you're going to be able to evolve and change it and realize, oh my God, wait, when I was just working on the letter forms, I didn't even think about this. And now that I'm actually going to put them to use, because you're going to be designing with them, you're going to be like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't work. I need to go back and adjust that.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts, everyone? Anybody? Other thoughts?
I really wish that I would have just started this way sooner. Like when it was assigned, I wish I would have digitized it right away, so then I would have had plenty of time to play with it. But I didn't realize what a challenge it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've successfully done it, at 9:59, I woke up super early this morning to keep working on it because I was so frustrated last night. Woke up early, got it done, and posted it. But it's in really rough shape. But I'm super excited to keep playing with it and seeing how I can enhance the letters and actually make it look better.
But look at yours. Look pretty in good shape, though.
Oh, they're janky.
But you know what that means? That means that you're attuning your eye to starting to look at what makes good letter forms, what make good form, like what communicates ideas. And that's actually even more important to start thinking about for all of us, right? Like when you start to sharpen that eye and you're like, oh, that's janky, then you already starting to realize like, you know what? A month ago, you wouldn't have been like, oh, those are cool. Those are great. I like them. They work. And now you're like, oh, wait a minute. That's janky. I need to make adjustments. But again, this exercise in many ways was just like translating the hand to a digital space. And that bridge is always like fraught. That bridge is like crazy. I mean, I don't know anybody that can actually pull it off right away. I know people that start digital and go back by hand and start to figure out what the idea is because they can't figure out on the computer. And then they go back. So it starts to inform that. Now, Franny, which tool did you use? Because I sent you a little video last night. that I did while watching a movie, because that's why it doesn't have any volume. But
so I used I first practiced using the Bezier tool or
the pen tool.
No, the website where you could like learn how to use the pen tool.
Yes, I
did that for like 2 hours, not able to figure it out. I had my sister look at it and like, help me figure this out. And then I ended up using the pen tool, and I just like started anew this morning, and that really helped having a clear mind.
Yeah.
But all I used was the pen tool, and I watched your video a couple times. I watched those other tutorials a few times, and like played it for 10 seconds, then did my marks. Played it for 10 seconds, and that was kind of the process I went.
Yeah.
And once I got a hang of things, I felt like it got better and better.
How many of you were doing each letter, like literally trace each letter from the get-go, or what? How do you do it? I'm wondering.
Well, I did copy and pasting.
Yep.
I took my I and then I copied it over for the K, and same for the J, and then drew the curve.
That's a really good way. Copy, you duplicate element. It's a tool of. I don't know if you've ever heard the term a kit of parts, which comes out of architecture. It's just a little system, and it has a set structure, DNA, little pieces, and then you start playing with them. It's like Legos, right? So then like the base, and then you can start copying it, and you start to like play with it and say, okay, what are the adjustments that I need to make? And then you start noting those, and you start to realize that one letter can be the basis for the other letter. And then you can start sketching it that way. And then once you have everything done, you can start going back and detailing, right? Which I think is what's going to happen from this week on, is that once you start to use the letter forms and apply and use these things, you're going to go back and make changes. So what you'll end up with, what you have today might be totally different from what you end up in 4 weeks from now.
Yeah.
Right. So, but the digital part is so great because it allows us to make the changes really quickly. And you don't have to be like, oh my God. Other thoughts, excuse me.
So I didn't draw every little bit of this. Because mine started with the two typefaces that were merged, I used the Pathfinder a lot.
Right.
And was that almost as if I had letters on a piece of paper that I was cutting up with scissors and spliced them together through the whole thing. And then when I got to things I wanted to nuance is where I did any drawing.
Yeah, you develop your little systems. Pathfinder tool is fabulous.
Yeah.
It's so good to play with. Just Illustrator can be tricky just because it's so big, but so is Photoshop, and so many people love using it and are very good at it. It's just, again, a bit about developing your own systems. And even when you're building something like this, you're sort of thinking of the idea and how to make that idea happen. I mean, this is the same thing if you were working analog. Like, if you were doing ceramics and you had this great idea of this piece and you're like, how am I going to make this thing happen? It's too big. It doesn't fit in an oven. I can't, and you start to figure out, how am I going to put it together? How does this happen? Right? It's the same way. So think about it that way. But again, going back to the original idea. What's the idea that you're manifesting in the letter form or in the form? What is it communicating? What are you interested in? And how do you push that forward using these ideas of building letters and building alphabets and building letter forms that sort of we can identify, or maybe we don't identify right away, right? Other thoughts?
I thought the digital part was actually really hard because I wanted more parameters. I started out with I'm gonna narrow it down, and then I don't know what the hell happened because there's so many options you can do. So I kind of appreciate the ruler limiting what you can use.
Right. So then that means that you have to think software has all sorts of tools. You can get lost in them and not do what you want to do. Excuse me. So the idea is, of course, okay, so what is it that I need? What are the essential things I need? Am I going to use the Pathfinder tool? Am I going to go just cutting and pasting? Am I going to just merge? Am I going to just actually take the pen tool and add some strokes to it? Or what is it that I'm doing? So you don't get lost in all the possibilities and then your idea going out the window. Go back to your idea. Constantly hit it back with your idea. And this is all about these designs like this too. It's you could have this amazing gesture that you've made, and then you go back to your idea. It's well, that gesture doesn't work. I need to put it away. Let me use that somewhere else. It doesn't work for this because it's not communicating further. So a question I have, how many of you were working on the computer and then you started to find things and make mistakes and do weird things and then you liked them and you kept them in the letter forms? Or were you all like Stacy, you were tracing it literally verbatim? How many of you do you find things? Katie says yes. Me. I think Katie's listening to us. And anybody else? Nobody's gonna fess up to it?
Say the question again?
So you were working in Illustrator and you were doing things because you were trying to make something happen, and something else happened. And then you were oh, wow. And then you kept that. You added to it. Or, I call them mistakes. You're trying to do this and something else happens. And you're ooh, what is that? And then you copy it and put it to the side and you start adding it to it. Did anybody else? Because that could also be a really nice process to start thinking about how you build something.
The closest thing I can say in relation to that is I had a plan where my letters were going to break and merge at the X height,
Yeah.
which two typefaces had in common. And I started to realize I wanted more variability in
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want it to be so rigid, so I started to break that rule a little bit. And so I have the rules drawn on my page, and I've reflected them vertically, or would that be horizontally? I've turned them upside down, so I created as kind of like an upside down X height.
Right.
And we got the secondary rules. So like with my Q, I let that left side of the Q merge at a lower point than the right. So it wasn't necessarily a mistake. It was just more of looking at this and going, okay, these are all starting to look, I want to break this up more.
Yeah, which actually,
But I guess what I did, now that I'm talking about that, because I didn't really realize that, what I realized the Q is like certain letters, because it's got that big tail, it's starting to look more, I feel like it looks more balanced having the left side of the O, the heavy part of the left side of the O, of the circle sit lower than the right side.
right.
Rather than if it's just an O with a tail, it looks like it wants to tip over. So
Right. Now, is that a rule that, for example, you would carry it onto the O, onto the G, onto the C?
Yeah, I looked at it with, I started looking at it. I went back then and started looking at it. I wanted the O to remain like really stable, so I left it alone. I looked at the G and played around with it, but I ended up liking how I had it the first time best. So yeah, I did start kind of going like red.
Yeah, because I think, Stacy, I think that actually breaking those rules and not being so rigid about it may even push this out to be even more like, have a lot more like, there's something about it that feels aggressive, but is not pushing that aggressivity with the letter forms yet. Because it's like, I wonder if you want them to feel forced, like they were forced to merge, or it's just like a very soft, right? The intention. So think about that in terms of like, when you start to use them, how forced the letters are. It's sort of like a dictator taking over and saying, you're gonna do this, rather than sort of like thinking like, I'm gonna like follow the rules of the baseline and all that. Because I think you can break a lot more rules and exaggerate things.
Yeah, and my idea here, the root idea is that I wanted this to feel, what I liked about this was that there's a little bit, it feels awkward because something's not quite right. Like it's two things that are familiar, but it's not quite right. And it's either it's like this reduction of something, or like a disturbance or something. So in terms of pushing it, I mean, that's where I have a question, like, what do I push on and keep that concept?
So what you could do, I'm gonna actually switch to show you the screen so we could like talk about these individually, and that way you can all see. So I'm gonna present my entire screen. This is so funny, like screen sharing. Let's see what happens. Share my entire screen. Yes. So hold on, wait. Okay, so I'm presenting my entire screen according to my little panel, and I'm gonna make the screen little here so I don't go there, so you don't have to look at yourself. So here's Stacy's letters, right? So I think one of the things is like, for example, one thing that you can all do is like this file, make sure you do a save as for the next iteration, okay? Don't just use the same file over and over in case you need to go back. Just remember that. Or you make copies of the letters and put them on the side of the pasteboard, just as a tip. So you're constantly like keeping track, and you're making it like taking stock of all the variations of the letters. So one of the things I think, if there's I use the word exaggeration with several of you when I was sort of posting little comments, exaggerating that idea that you have, right? Like, so if this is a merge, like exaggerate the merge, and how does the merge happen? Does it need to sit so comfortably, right? Like, this tip here on the Q, this little idea, I think you can push that so much further and see how it manifests. Can that idea hold in the P, for example, right? Can that exaggeration of the letter not feeling so balanced, you say the O feels so balanced. It actually doesn't feel balanced just because of the merge, right? And the bow feels a little like it got chopped. So I wonder if you can actually like be more aggressive with it. And see what happens, right? simple thing, right? Like the punctuation. Look at the brackets. Both brackets sit on the same, like they're the same. It's just flipped. No, they're flipped. But I wonder if like, do they actually flip upside down? So one has the heavier counter at the bottom than the top, and that sort of tips it. I also think you can also play with the stroke itself and see whether the stroke. Think about this more as a typeface that is more fluid and more animated. If you were to think about this in animation, that the letters can actually grow. They can actually like sort of get larger and smaller depending on like how the viewer is looking at them, right? Are these letters that as I get closer to it, they start getting bigger or they get smaller because they can sense that I'm really, really, really close. And then if I get far, the letter just gets large. But what are the mechanics of the letters that you need to adjust so that the reader starts to get that idea? Does that make sense, Stacey? Like,
yeah, vaguely conceptually, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a concept, exactly. So you're thinking about concept. So what's the idea? What's the concept behind here? Then let me try testing it out and see how far I can push it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think if you push it will get away is like that. In many ways, if you are a designer and you know typography and you know letterforms and you like letterforms, you know what typefaces these are. So I'm wondering if you can push it out of that way, right? Like, I can see the Baskerville flying out at me. Like, I see it because I know it. So I wonder if you can, like, get it to a point where it obliterates so that Baskerville becomes the great-grandmother of this. But you start to see something else there. There's something else that the designer is interested in talking about. And it's this merge. And merging is not always really comfortable and really nice, right? Like, put it in human terms. Marriages are not always comfortable. Apologies to those of you that are married. Okay, I'm just thinking relationships, right? Friendships, they're not always comfortable, right? Sometimes they're really aggravating. So is that an idea that you're manifesting? It's not always comfortable. It's not always like it's all proportional and nice. No, it starts to. It's a thing that's alive, and it starts to do jerky things. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you see the examples that I showed of I put a lot of examples on here. Like, let me see, Project One references. Like, I did a lot of it. Did you all see the Carl Narut stuff? Did you all take a look at that? So I put a link here. I'll show you. I'm gonna open up a screen on here so you'll see. Right, and Carl is super obsessed with architecture, so he builds these tools to make letterforms that are very architectural. Like, he's very, very into architecture. And he starts to build these things. And sometimes they just get pushed to a place where you're like, yikes. Right? Like, he pushes things to a place where, look at that. And it's all just built out of a little tool. Like, look, he uses a lot of stencils and he makes tools. And this is a typeface, I believe it's called Dress. Right? So he starts to exaggerate certain things. Here's these letter forms made out of this stencil. So those single forms start to push. Here's one that he just used rubber stamps to make the letter forms out of, right? So you start to like push. He also likes to use some architectural, so he uses a lot of architectural tools to develop things. So, you know, exaggeration is always really exciting and can lead you to really fabulous places. You know, here's like, look, here's different variations of the letter A, right? I'll put this little link on there so you can all look at it. He's kind of really, he's thinking a lot manually that then gets turned digitally, right? Like, he goes to the computer with it. Come on, there we go. I just put it on there so you can all see it. All right, does that help you, Stacey? Is that?
Yep.
Good. Okay. I'm gonna go to the top for people that have posted, and we're gonna like just go down the line. I want to see what's going on here, right? So, Sigrid, you want to talk a little bit about your alphabet and how you figured it out and all of that?
Yeah. My internet might be crappy, so apologies in advance for that. But Actually, I'm using like LTE right now, which is a little bit terrifying. Okay.
But it's good these days.
Yeah, I mean, so initially I just started out by like basically tracing them. I used the Pathfinder tool to merge shapes, which was really the best route, I think, because of the types of letters that I had.
Yep.
Because they were so geometric. Honestly can't even fathom trying to use the pen tool in that situation. It would have just been a huge waste of time. So I think I got lucky there. But so I started out kind of pretty, like creating it pretty much the same as I had it before. And then just sort of like messing around with different types of punctuation that I didn't have yet.
Yeah.
But I was really concerned about the S in my original one. So I was kind of messing around with that.
Yeah.
It got like really weird. Like as you can see in that second one, the one you're showing.
Yeah.
Like the middle ones. And it was fun because I'm at my parents right now, so I was having like, my mom and my dad like give me feedback on it, and they were like, "Yeah, like try this or like do this or whatever." But I was trying to push it, and it ended up getting really gross. Like I absolutely hate those center ones.
Which one is that one? Do I go to the next? Hold on, let's see.
The ones that are no, okay. So the page that you were on before, the one like the same scheme as the G. So like the second two that look a lot more like actual S's.
So this two here.
Yeah.
Got it.
Those ones, I think they're like very ugly, and when I put them back in with the rest of the letters, they don't look at all like they're really within the theme.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's because like I think the entire nature of my alphabet is sort of like a reduction of the letters, and that was almost too faithfully reproduced or something.
Well, you also add this diagonal in there, which doesn't show up anywhere else.
There is one in the G.
There is one in the G? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it was like a triangle and a circle for the G. Yeah, that's sort of where I got the idea to try that even.
Right.
But I think the fact that there was also like multiple holes in it, that it just didn't work. So I ended up going back to like the original idea, and then
I wonder if you angle the punctures, if you put them diagonally, if that works. Similar, you see how you put it diagonally here on the J?
Yeah.
I wonder if these on the S go diagonal like that, it will sustain it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I did try that actually, and it just ended up making it look weird. But
what do you mean by weird? Because weird is good. Remember that,
I know.
It could be interesting.
Yeah, no, exactly. But I don't think it made it look more like an S, I guess. So
okay.
And I think so. One thing I guess I am now interested to do after you like introduced, to overuse that word in the sentence now, the concept of Karl Narat, or however you say his name, because he was actually one of my initial inspirations. Because I thought it was interesting that he like was creating letters that were just shapes, you know, like the things.
They are shapes. Remember that. If you remember, this is form. If I don't speak a Latin alphabet, these are just shapes to me, right? Like think about that. So they're just shapes. Just play with them. Have a good time.
Yeah. So now the thing that I'm excited to like maybe mess around with is try to make them different sizes, because mine are all really uniform, which I don't dislike, but I really liked in those examples that you were just showing how there were some letters that were like literally just bigger than the other letters.
And that's what the next project is going to ask you to do, kind of, because you're ahead of time. I'll review it over, but you're doing a poster. Or posters, and you'll be able to play with scale in the composition, because that's really super important. I actually think that the outline forms of these are really, really awesome.
Yeah, I like them too.
And I don't know, I think that this version here feels a little too much. Yeah. This feels like almost just right. Like almost like I can play with that. Like I want to play. And I wonder if the solid forms like are just sort of a skeleton. They're not. You never really use it that way. You only ever use it this way, right? Like the outline, or maybe you can insert like gradient or patterning, or I don't know. Have you ever done a step and repeat?
No.
In Illustrator? Okay, I'll show you all how to do a step and repeat. Could you do me a big, super big favor and send me like a few of these letters from Illustrator?
Yeah, I can do that.
And I'll show you how to do a step. And I'll put a little video after I'm done with everybody so that you can all see. It's super easy. You've all seen it a million times. And in Illustrator, it's done super fast. Like, it's a key command that just duplicates things. So, because I tend to think that one of the things you may want to do on here, and I appreciate all this process so that everybody can see sort of like, oh my God, all the struggles and the playing around with, is just when you start to look at it, I want you to make, actually, it shows up better on this form than, like, I'm wondering if sort of these little negative spaces within the letters all are constantly horizontal or some are vertical, because when they're, and what's the rule? Like when they come out from outside of the letter form, they seem to be vertical, but then when they're inside the ball, they become horizontal, but then look at the Q has it vertical. So something like that, you want to start thinking about what the rule is. And also, for example, in the I feels like the cut comes in really intense and it's much larger than it appears on the rest of the alphabet. So is there a consistency within these cuts, right? Like, is it the same cut? Is it the same proportion? Think about that, right? And what you're doing is, because of the shape of the letter, you're actually making changes just to reflect the fact that the letter forms are different shapes, but it's actually the same sort of like cut coming in at it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do you think it would be better to have that uniformity?
I don't know. I'm reacting.
Yeah, that's fair.
That's a switch you can do, and it might be something that you can play with as you get larger, with it. So I think that it's really. I'm switching around. I think as you get larger, you start to see. Right? Because these are small, but when you blow them up, interesting, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Good.
Yeah, one thing, like one final thing, is on that one that you were just showing that's like the different, the one that you were like doesn't really work. I think part of that, I agree with you, I think part of that is because when I was like creating the letters, so the thin line is like 1 point, I think that's like 5 points or something, and the lines go out. And I was like wanting them to go in, Yeah. The original shape stayed the same. And I'm not sure how I would do that without like overlap, like putting a letter on top of it that were slightly smaller.
So, okay, so one thing, do you try like half a point or hairline on these to see how thin they go? 1, and 2, do you try taking the end point and curving them just to see what it would do?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll do that.
And if you pull the stroke palette out, you'll see that there's like the thickness of the stroke, and then you'll see those little buttons that have circular endings or sort of diagonal cuts. See what happens, because you might be able to get that. That might be something that will add a little, like, you could do a version of the letter form that's rounded.
Yeah, like bubbles.
Like bubbles, yes, exactly. Cool, awesome. All right, Katie. Let's talk. Oh wait, let's go down, because this was Katie's. You see the color? So one thing as we're working on type this semester, we're just working in black and white. Color becomes a whole other animal, just to let you all know. So try not to get seduced by color yet. Just sort of work focus. And I said that to Katie, and then she went back to black and white. So Stacy, we're good. Jill, talk about your letter forms. Well, how was this for you, and what are you seeing?
So I thought, I didn't have like a very hard time replicating what I drew originally. So I have pretty simple shapes that I'm working with. So I just used like the same circle and the same like narrow rectangle to make most of it.
Yep.
and then use the Pathfinder to smush them together. And I started with a pretty faithful recreation, and I posted a few sort of like different weight experiments and changing the size of the circles.
Yeah. What do you all think about Jill's alphabet? Like, what do you think about it? Which parts start to work for you, and which parts you wanted to see more?
I thought I thought the experiments with the like ball size on the last one that you did were really interesting, and I thought it was like intriguing that you had to add the like junction balls in order to sort of like create the additional set of them to do that with. But I think it looks really cool, and also when Ramon was just like paging through them, it made me want you to like animate this somehow. So.
What is really cool about it? What are you reacting when you say cool?
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting look, I guess. Let me pull it up on mine so I can page through it on my own. Yeah, I think it's interesting visually, I guess, because they are like the original alphabet is very like there are only two differences really, except in like the exclamation point. There are only two differences in like thing, I guess, or like size. There's like the thick ball, and then there's like the really thin line.
So it's playing with the contrast.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very explicit 2-point contrast. Okay, great. All right.
Yeah. And so I think adding like a third level in there with the medium-sized balls or whatever is interesting, and also interesting because it adds like another layer that takes out that sort of like singular dichotomy, and makes sort of this like intermediary thing that's interesting. And then also I think I totally just lost my train of thought.
Ignore my scrolling. I just need to go up to look for something. So as you all talk, yeah,
I don't know. I just think it adds like a second level of playfulness almost to it. Also, it's more busy for sure because there are more dots.
Yeah.
What I feel like I hear you saying between the lines, Sigrid, but so tell me if not, but this is kind of how I'm interpreting it, is that when there's more variability in the weights of things, it fits with this because you can easily interpret those as like bubbles emerging. And you mentioned wanting to see it animated, and you can almost imagine those bubbles kind of growing and popping and continuing to develop and going away and coming back again.
So it feels more fluid. I mean, what's interesting is that we're talking about letter forms that are not quite as solid as they would be on printed matter, for example, right? Where they need to sit flat, they're not going to move. But you're thinking about like if these get animated. I mean, this is all in reaction to how much time we spend in front of screens these days. Right? Like we're constantly seeing motion, we're seeing video, we're seeing things move, so we're reacting to that. And I think the idea of a contrast, Jill, I think it's really, really striking. But again, I think one more chance, I think you can push it even further because I think it has space. Like those terminals, I just opened up the because I want to get into the habit of us using the vocabulary. I want you to get used to the vocabulary, and I myself sometimes forget the vocabulary, and I stop using it. So I'm like, oh, those little bubbles, technically those are terminals, right? Like those terminals, I think are the contrast with the terminals. I think could be really maximized and pushed further. And I think the idea, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, the idea of the contrast being the main idea. Is that the main idea that you were going for?
Yeah.
So I want you to push it further. I actually think that, okay, if I say this is the original, because this is the closest to the hand sketches, right?
Right.
Right. This is the original. Starts to go, okay, I can see. It's a little too static. That's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering if this S gets flipped. I wonder if you try flipping the S. It feels like this bottom part, right, wants to go up Like if you just flip the letter S, maybe. I'm not quite sure. If it's about the contrast, I wonder if it's just the terminals are always the same size, or you want to play with them. Take a look at the width of the K. Look how thin it starts to get in contrast to the rest of them, right? Is the width of the letter forms the same throughout? And if it is, does that mean that, look at the P also gets really thin, and the N gets thin, but the M opens up wide. The X, look how wide it opens out, right? So start thinking about what's the width. If it's a mono typeface, then that means that the width is the same for all the letters. So you want to play with that, you can play with that, but just make a decision. I actually start thinking this is the most successful version of it so far, right here, where the terminals tend to be a little more subtle. But I'm also wondering if you can push it where not just, I'm trying to figure out, let's see, not just the terminals is what grows, but the actual stroke grows as well. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that the contrast may be, you start to see these little bumps happen. And of course, if you print this out really large, you will start to see that there's these rounded terminals or these rounded moments in the letter forms, in contrast to the rest of the stroke. The stroke kind of bubbles out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it's just like, and again, I think when you start this week's assignment, when you start working on the poster and you'll be able to use just a few of the characters, you're going to start playing out even more with it. Cool?
I really like how the exclamation point has like 3 different terminals because it has an obvious direction.
I was gonna kind of play with that more. I had that thought like late last night, using them to sort of like indicate the direction of them. Like in the A, for example, like the top one would be smaller than the bottom ones.
Right. So and that's a really good point to start playing with that.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do that.
It starts also indicating more movement, right? So you can start saying, oh, can the letter form start moving? Can you actually make it, can you make the letter forms actually indicate direction for a reader or somebody to engage with it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that could end up looking to like our tone a little bit in a fun way with those like really heavy bottoms. Depending on how
totally.
I really like the idea of like having a family though of like things getting more like funny or like silly, like as you like carve away, having those terminals become more defined, and like having all the options. So like the one you're showing now, Ramon, being like the more subtle version, but then having the option of like all of the degrees of like pronounced.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you a typeface right now that plays a little bit with that idea, so you can all see Foundries. This is in Village. Let me look for Lux typo. So this is Greg Lindy's, and look at Colette. Colette, look at this. Goes from thin all the way to ultra jumbo. And that ultra jumbo, I'm not kidding you, is like it's like the Marshmallow Man just takes over you. Look, right? It goes from here. This is how it starts out. Look at that.
Yeah.
And then you get to bold, which is still kind of like, okay, that's great. And then it gets to black. And then it gets to jumbo. And then it gets to ultra jumbo. So if you're talking about high, look at that. Right? So it starts to play with sort of the extreme of it. And the characteristic of the letter form actually starts to change.
Yeah, and it's like, what mood are you in? It's like a mood ring font.
It's like a mood ring, yes. I like that. Awesome. Jill, is that helpful?
Yeah.
I think look at the width of the letter forms. And I think that's one place where you want to make adjustments to figure out whether it's really wide or it's really narrow. because right now it's got both. But that might be part of it. You don't need to necessarily say, oh, they all need to be the same. It's like, no, this is a letter form. This is a letter forms that actually have different widths. Okay, Molly, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, talk a little bit about this idea and how you did it, and how, what you're seeing, and what you want to work on, and what you want to tweak.
Some things that I think really worked well are the O. I still really love this O, which translated so nicely to the Q. I struggled a little bit with it on the G because I was using that, I don't know if I call that terminal. I think the B and the R are still a little awkward, but I love the P. So I wasn't quite sure how that was going to translate a little bit. And I want the R to sort of touch the leg.
Yeah.
Instead of being separate.
Yeah.
That I'm not sure where that went. And then the U always felt like I kind of wanted the left side of that to like curve in a little bit. Write that on the bottom.
Yeah. I'm just wondering. So here's what I'm thinking, and you can all chime in. So there's some letter forms that have that sort of descender feel, right, of the G, right? And then there's some like the E, F, H, I, L, M, N, V, W, X, Y, Z, T that sort of get a little too straight.
Okay.
Right? Whereas the other ones are sort of playing with this sort of like curve, whether how to play with that curvature, right? The B feels a bit like an alien form coming out, right?
Yeah.
Like this here, the stem gets too out of control here, right? And yeah, the R is tricky, but I'm wondering if it's just a matter of making adjustments to the P to help you flesh out the R. And I think, meeting the leg will help out. And perhaps it's not just the leg that gets attached, it's actually that it's built out together all at once. As if you imagine writing, if you write an R, you write it all together. I think most of us probably do. It's one stroke, it's not two strokes. So, and I actually, but the thing I have to say is that these letters that I called out, I actually find them really beautiful. They can be refined further. So I'm wondering if perhaps it's one solution could be pulling back on this curvature, so it's not so dictated by that sort of like descender from the G, but mostly it's just an idea in the back of your head that you like that, so there's something about it so that it frees you up a little bit from trying to restrain everything in here. Am I making sense?
Yeah. That helps.
Right, so that you're not like so attached to it that it needs to physically manifest in every letter form, but it's an idea that's built in there. I think the S is going in that direction. It's got it. Somebody wants to party in the background. Somebody's doggy.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's a Philly dog. I'm turning my mic.
No, it's okay. But you know what I mean, Molly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I think what's happening is that you're letting your love of that G, of that descender, like that little leg, get like try to manifest itself in every possible way, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just a more subtle thing, right?
Sure. Yep.
Does that help? Is there any other thoughts from any of you?
I really love the B. It does feel like more of a departure than most of the other letters, but I think it's really cool. I love the negative positive space contradiction in it. I think that, and I think the way I see what you're describing, Ramon, where some of the letters, the H through N and V through Z,
right,
differentiate. Their character looks more like a calligraphy pen, and the more fluid letters look more like they were made with a brush. And that's how I see the separation between them.
That's a really good observation. Yeah, thank you for saying that. As soon as you said it, I was like, right.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Like yeah, you're right.
But I love how the B, I mean, where you started with your concept with the tail on the G, descender on the G, and it just kind of ended up morphing into something else in the B, which is really fun.
So, Molly, one way to do this, I think, could be just make a copy and use the Pathfinder tool and start to merge sections and see what works the best. Because you may get some really interesting merges that gives you that little bit of right, and then maybe the gesture of the G, that little gesture, you make decisions of which letter forms it shows up in, right?
Okay.
But that idea that it's calligraphy, and this is funny. I'm like, I still have Carl Narud here. Look, he did this typeface. I have a book somewhere that has it, right? And look at, like, it feels like it's calligraphy, but he did it all digitally, by the way. But like, it's like a calligraphy pen or like a very sharp edge, and then you can make a decision when the curvature, you see here the D, and it happens on the G and the C, where it's starting to look like it's sort of more three-dimensional, and you can start to play with that. So that maybe you go back and say, okay, so if I like this calligraphy letter sequence, let me start building the G that way. Let me go to the B that way, and then see what can come up if I start to merge things.
Okay.
Right? Cool. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. So, Olivia.
Yeah.
Thoughts on these letter forms? And I have this. This is the original hand sketch?
No, so I actually took my original hand sketch from last week and just like kind of rearranged it and enlarged the letters, just their placement. I think you went one too far.
Yeah. Sorry.
So that I could just kind of see more of like the nuances of each of the forms. So I redrew my original sketch and then did a trace. And so this is like the closest one to my original.
Got it. Okay.
So I did like a trace of that. And then I was really like, it really resonated with what you were saying about how we want to keep going back to like our original intention. Because I found myself doing that a lot in this exercise for this week. Because my original inspiration was a typewriter font. Mm-hmm. So like from an old school typewriter, like what appears on the paper. So I was trying to find a balance between like, clean lines and also like imperfect lines, because, on a typewriter, you're not getting like a perfect, imprint, like the ink isn't distributed evenly across the whole thing. So I think that was like definitely a challenge for me, in digitizing it, because there is like this, kind of like, at least for me, like a desire to like try to perfect it. But that wasn't my original intention. So I was I still think I can do some work with this to like make it, it's nowhere near complete, but I like how it's coming together. I'm trying to like incorporate some of that whimsical kind of feel, while also like making sure like the corners and the lines are like a little cleaner than my original sketch.
Yeah. So. Okay. I mean, I can see the monotype quality of like being a typewriter font. The one thing that I reacted to it is how jumpy the letter forms are. Like they're not in the same. They feel like they're not in the same baseline, which to me feels like a typewriter, right? Yeah. The way that the K and the N and the R sort of like they keep going. Like they're like trying to walk onto the next step because they want to go to the next baseline. And I think that
I was kind of playing around with that, and that wasn't my original. Like in my first sketch, I had them all on the same baseline. But then as I was redrawing it, I was like, I don't know. I just kind of like was going with it. I think I did it on the K, and then I was like, this kind of looks cool. So I kept playing with it. I don't know. What do you think of that? Do you feel like? I feel like
it's something you can pull off even further. Like I like the fact that the letters are starting to sort of like. If you're thinking of typewriter and the idea that you can't get a straight line on a typewriter, right? Like you technically can't. right? So
Right.
so you want to play with that even further. I think the one thing that I would say is, what I would say is where they sit and how tall they are. For example, the C and the G feel really tall in contrast to the
Okay.
rest of the letters. The A starts to flatten out because it's got that flat top at the top, which
Okay.
doesn't really show up that often. If you're gonna do a terminal like the F there, the serif at the F there, and the E has it, you want to be consistent throughout. Look, the Z starts to do funky things as well, and then the Y, look how tall it gets. Right, so you want to start thinking, okay, well, let's see, how do I rein this in a little bit so that there's certain sort of thing that's constant throughout. And the biggest note that I have is that I think you want to, if you're going to go the route that you want to go into the typewriter, this sort of like typewriter line that constantly moves, I'm great with that. I want you to, like, for example, the B feels like it's handwriting still. So you want to start to figure out, okay, how do I start to get these to really be, the lines tend to be clean so that I can get the idea across. Because it feels, some of the letters feel like they're still like on the pen sketch moment.
Sure. Okay.
So you want to start to push it in a direction, and this may mean that you just need to just start to play with making lines. Just make them out of making like strokes, put 3 strokes together. Here's, make the serifs, add the serifs to it, and merge it together in the Pathfinder tool, right? So that they contain, so that it's all a matter of you pulling the stroke out or in, or if it's the O, how do I do the O so that it's doesn't feel like I'm just sort of drawing an O or a circle, because that's not what I'm going for. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. That's really helpful.
Yeah, because I think you want to, if they still feel like, look at the V here, and that's maybe because you're using the pen tool. But look, if you look at the bottom of the V, look at that little cut there.
Yes.
It's like, oh, what happened there? That chop.
Yeah, it could still definitely be clear.
Feels a little too rough. So I think it's just a matter of like making the decisions on like how you want to refine it and what the specific rules of the system are, and then pushing it through.
Gotcha. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
And the typewriter typefaces, the interesting thing about the typewriters is that they were tended to be very light, so you couldn't really get bold.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to start thinking of how
like the different weights just to see how it would look. But I think I'll ultimately end up going with like a like the thinner.
But I think you could play with this because we're dealing with computers now. We can make those really bold weights, but you would have to make adjustments. And I hope that's something that you're all seeing as you get to the bold weights when you try it. There's adjustments you need to make to the letterforms for them to start reading well, because otherwise they just start to turn into big blobs.
Yeah,
cool.
We don't want that.
Yeah, I mean you may. So
that's true.
Excellent. All right, Katie. Talk a little bit about what you got here.
Okay. I'm driving cross country right now, so maybe a little spotty. I just tried to pull on things, and I kept them in, I guess the letters are all monotype. Maybe is that what I'm trying to say?
So monotype, they're all the same width. Same height, same width, like a typewriter. Okay.
So I just played with the insides of things, the insides of the stems and the crossbars to try to give some interest. But I was struggling a little bit with how to expand them more.
Yeah. So I think I'm looking at the first one that you posted, right? Is that the first version of it?
That's actually the third version. I posted. That's the first version right there.
That's the first version. Okay, good. I'm glad you went away from it. Okay. I'll tell you why. Not that I think that's a good beginning, but one of the things that I got really excited here is that these start to look like they're actually paper cutouts. Because there's all these quirky, like if you look at the R here, this like uneven cut in here. and look at the X, it's like totally like quote unquote imperfect. And that feels like, oh, these letters are a different thing. The T does this really funny, like super skinny stem, and then the like the cross here is just like, what's going on? So they feel like they're just like you're experimenting with trying to create like construction paper letters, which I think is really exciting, and I think you can push it even further. The S feels like the S is like, oh, there's a curve here, so I'm struggling with cutting that paper. And it feels a little bit like that. But then there's this negative space on the O, the Q, the U, the G, the D, the C, where you can see the family right there. It's literally like the same cut happening. The B has it a little bit as well. So there's this diagonal that you're cutting at that you can see right on the O here that manifests itself throughout. And that dictates the fact that, for example, the U is not even, right? And I think you can play with that throughout the other letter forms. That unevenness in the cut, that sort of the diagonal that you're cutting at, or that you're emphasizing at. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You can even pull it off in the L too. The L, there's a certain like angle that the letters kind of feel like they're sitting on. The O, the Q, the U. So I wonder how to manifest that idea through the other letter forms as well.
Okay.
Other thoughts that people have?
I really like it. It has a subtle but cool kind of energy.
It is subtle and it is cool. I do want to challenge all of you. When you say the word cool, what do you mean? I want you to start thinking through that. Just because it's one of those words that we all use, and it's like, what do you really mean by that? I don't,
I think that it's moving, but it also looks really solid.
Yeah, definitely. I also wonder, Katie, if these would be like just outlined, what they would look like. The outlines could be really interesting if they weren't solid. Oops, let me go back here for a second. There's one here. The height, the first one here, which is the third version, I really like the height of them. I think when you go to the other, these start to feel too squash. It's like you're like forcing them to squash, or somebody put them in Photoshop and just sort of like stretch the letter form. This height feels sort of like just right to me. I don't know how you're all feeling about this. And also look at the punctuation. Start to see how that can this idea manifests itself on the punctuation. For example, the quotation marks. Do the quotation marks sit at this angle as well? Right? Does the period sit not squared, but kind of at an angle? It's the same way that other letter forms start to play with that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Okay. Others? Anybody has other thoughts before I keep moving?
I like that it feels like kind of irregular, but then there are still like those similar shapes, like in the O and the U, the D and the Q. You can kind of feel like that's the same angled curve.
Yeah. It's the same family, right? It's like you see them. Yeah.
Like the C and the G and the J all have that like similar little crook thing.
Yeah, and I think you want to maximize that. If that's what it is, you want to see how does it manifest throughout.
Yeah, I think I really like the cut paper description that you were saying about it, Ramon. I think that effect is really cool, especially in I think those letters that Jessa was pointing out, like the Q, the O, and the U.
Yeah.
And I feel like I want to see that in like the A and the H more, and like some of those letters that feel really solid.
Yeah.
In comparison, and also like the one thing that like weirdly bothers me about this font, like I really or typeface, I really like it, but like the T, I want to see the T like a capital T, because it's just like as I'm reading through it, I'm like, why is that a lowercase t? I mean, I think the shape is really cool, but I'd be curious to see it that way too.
Right. Or are there elements from the lowercase that are actually showing up in the uppercase because there's a quirk to it? For example, you could say that the I could become a lowercase I, so you could put the dot finial at the top, right?
Yeah,
but then there's 2 or 3 letters that actually the lowercase is the most interesting one.
Definitely. Well, and I think if that were more like a thing that showed up throughout, it would feel more cohesive or something.
And again, that's something that you're all going to have to play with once we get to the next assignment, the next part, which is making posters, which is you're going to have to sort of make decisions because you're going to be using actual text. So you have to sort of say, oh, I need to adjust this letter because I kind of actually want to use lowercase I. Just because visually it would make sense within the idea of this poster, for example, rather than the uppercase. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, Jessa, what's up?
Okay. So the full alphabet that I posted was my favorite, which was actually my first pen tool attempt, and then I was like playing around with in the other ONUIs. I was just playing around with like trying to exaggerate, as I was saying, like in either direction.
Yep.
Those angles. And I just was really creeped out by the second like skinny version. It made me think of like peg legs and I just,
it is terrifying.
I'm sorry.
It's terrifying. You're right.
It's terrifying. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I decided, like I was thinking that maybe what I was trying to do was too subtle initially, which is why I was like trying out the exaggerating it. But I decided I like I'm just curious about how to figure out how to do the curves with the pen tool, because it's this like strange like trapezoid shape, and I just don't really understand how to use the pen tool in that weird angled, like it's not really, I'm not trying to make like an edge of a circle, so I'm confused about how many like steps to use.
Okay, so one thing about the pen tool is that you always want to use the less amount of strokes as possible.
Right.
That's one thing. But the other thing that okay, so from your initial alphabet to this, like I'm looking at the ABC, all the letters here. I think this is so weirdly funny and quirky and interesting and chunky, and some of these letters I kind of want to eat them because they look like pieces of cake or candy or something, and I can't quite tell what they are, but I'm like, oh, that S looks so good. Like there's all these like little like quirky things that happen to the letter forms, partly because you're like, I'm using this pen tool and I've never used the tool, and it's pushing me into another form, and I keep looking at my sketch, and my sketch was so specific and had this specific idea that was going to be played out. And then I get to digital and I get these weird things. The B also looks like, I mean, it's like looking at a, like, I don't know, going to a bakery and looking at like some sort of really delicious morning bakery thing, and there's like a whole like tray of it and you just don't know what to do because you want it all. The K can be worked on. The P can borrow more from the B. The S I think holds the whole thing for me, and it's just figuring out how you do that throughout the letter forms. But I think one thing you can play with is you play with the Pathfinder tool. Like why are you trying to make some of these with the pen tool? I think these are like about adding and subtracting things to it. So if you have the basic letter, then you can start adding or subtracting the forms. For example, if this, like, if this space here, right, in the B, the negative space here, if that's the shape that things are going to take, then take that, copy it, have a bunch made here, and then start to play by adding it onto the R, onto the P. Is that the same shape that shows up in the Q inside? It just gets larger, right? In the S, look at the end here, the terminal in the S, like it's got that pointed corner. Does that mean that that pointed corner shows up in the Z, right? In the U, in the G? So it doesn't feel so like it's running out of control from you. Because I feel part of what you're feeling is like, oh my God, this tool got too out of control. You can use the pen tool to make the basic shape of a letter and then use the Pathfinder to add or subtract the cutouts or the chunks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I need to like mentally separate the drawing and then just I'm a little confused about like how to use the path. Like I could just draw like a trapezoid shape and then cut it into the path.
Yeah. Just take a look at the little video I put last week. It's just super, and a lot of it is playing around. The Pathfinder tool, everyone, is about playing around. And the Pathfinder tool shows up in InDesign, so when we get to InDesign, you'll see it. And it's this amazing little tool that allows you to cut and merge things together without having to just like group them together. Because when you group, you don't really, they're still all separate and you're like, don't want to do that sometimes.
Right.
But I think what you could do with the pen tool from the original sketch is just draw the basic letter. It might just be like if you have the N, you just draw the basic N, and then you start to make the decisions that maybe you have these little circles or these little terminals of the S, and you have this shape on the side, and then you start to play with the letter form to see what it does when you add or subtract these sections, the negative space, the positive space. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's cool. It's like taking bites out of things with the
pattern. That's a really good way to think about it. Taking bite out or filling in.
Yeah. Awesome.
But I think the S, I don't know what you all think, but I think the S is really beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite too. And I think really the only thing that, like the main thing that informed the S was the G. Like after I did the G, I wanted to like recreate the shape of like the little G part at the bottom in the S hole.
Yep. There. So you can take that little part, cut it out, and just have it, and then you can start to add it to other parts using the Pathfinder tool. Right? I think the O is also in good shape. The B and the P, I think the R needs a little bit of work, partly because the leg is too out there. It may need to be more angled, coming out of somewhere else. The N starting to look interesting. The M and the N should lead you in the path of the M. Right? So
they look very different, I guess. Yeah,
they look very different. And then the J and the L can be following in that path. The M and the W, the M can inform the W. So you see how that works there? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Play more with it. I mean, I think you were playing with it, but you were playing. This Frankensteinian is hilarious.
Yes.
This U feels almost right. There's something funny as heck about this U. And this idea of like a really wide letter form, I think is really interesting. Cool?
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Kelsey! What's up? What do you have here? Your explosion, as you called it.
Yeah. So I'm struggling with clarifying an idea.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. Like some of the letters are just placeholders. Like I'm not going to keep the H and the I or the T, but I feel like I got stuck because there are so many options. But the idea I was trying to clarify or like refine was the idea of putting boundaries on the letters, the shapes or the curves. But I know it's not really cohesive anymore.
Well, you could see the boundary because the letters are all like within this frame, right? So they're all the same width. You can say, right? I think what's happening is that you are like attached to that initial sketch by hand, right? And then there's certain you haven't made, because there's so many choices, you just haven't made the decision of like, okay, so if this is about the boundaries, okay, so I can play within this square, and there's certain characteristics of the letter forms. For example, does this little leg here become that bulbous kind of thing that grows out of the letter forms? And there's every letter form has an area that's attached to this frame, the border. So, which I think manifests itself throughout, except you sort of like decided to go in other directions with other things, so you started adding things. Again, I think this is one of those where like the rule is you have to kind of work you make the square and then you start adding things into it to see what works. And what I'm wondering is, for example, all these like experimenting sort of like these droopy forms and all that, like when is it too many, right? So if the idea is within this boundary, I tend to think sort of like the L, right? The L, like the letters that have that stem pronounced, L, K, J, M, N, P, the D, the E, those are easier to deal with that idea. The other ones start to challenge. This Q starts to get interesting to me. But again, it's like you were just trying to like, I have to add this ginormous bulbous thing on top, right? The S could be really, really fun with this play on you're playing with the contrast as well. Keep that in mind. You can even play on the L, you can play this thinner and this chunk here, right? So it's literally the merging of like, you have this idea of the ruler, which is straight, and then you decided, how am I going to make these like crazy sort of bulbous, I think of like flower bulbs. They're starting to look like flower bulbs, like when you get bulbs and you like paper whites. How am I going to add those to those? But in many ways, keep them sort of like this, a little jerky, because of course your original tool was a ruler. So you don't necessarily need to smooth it out. I think there's just like, you just need to pick, there's 2 or 3 things that happen in each, 2 things maybe that happen in each letter form, and play that out. Does that?
Sure.
I think you're thinking there's too many, you're letting yourself think too many things, right?
Yeah. Constant theme.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's just a simple idea, right? Like the main idea is this frame that the letters have to sit in, and then there's this other thing that gets attached to them. Cool. Does that work? Other thoughts? Anybody else?
They remind me of storybook characters, those like big capitals that sit inside of a frame like that.
Yeah.
That have all the tiny little curly Q things within them. And I feel like that, like playing that concept would be interesting, because some of them have a bunch of little, like the M. Now that Ramon's like, I need to find it up.
Yeah, because I'm going to find it while you talk. So
that's okay. I step it up. So I need to look.
I mean, you could start looking at illuminated manuscripts, right? Like they have those ridiculously beautiful starter caps. So these become like those starter caps, right? Look at that.
And I think like your M makes me feel that way a lot with a lot of the like curvy things in it. But,
right. See, look, right?
Wow.
Right, but they're all like staying to like a particular like proportion and frame, because these things were made like following proportion, and so they're initial caps, right? So you could take a look at those, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
But play with the idea of the fact that you have this frame, right? That there's this space that these letters live in, and they have to abide by that. So you always have to see the frame has to be visible. That box has to be visible somewhere on the letter, right? It's not just a cut, but it actually gets shown.
Yeah, that's still my favorite part about this typeface, and I think I like it a lot. Like in the C, how if like in that or in the J too, where it's like your mind thinks that it will be a blob, but then it turns into this
right, definitely.
Okay, that's good.
Cool. Okay, so Franny.
Yes.
Franny, tell us a little bit about these. I know a little bit about because you emailed me last night. So.
Yeah, they were a struggle, but I'm so happy that I got them done, and I feel like they're successful, but I want to do so much more with them now that they've been digitized. I feel like they're all just too blocky and uniform, and I want there to be a little more movement and negative space between the ascenders or descenders.
Yeah.
And I realized that the corners aren't all uniform.
Okay.
And I think that it would help make it more cohesive if the corners for like the P and the R were the same.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you all think about these chunky forms?
I think they're fun. They read beautifully together. And the only thing that sort of is tricking my eye a little bit is the difference in the widths in the cutouts, like in the center of the O, Q, the horizontal P and R.
The U.
Should they be the same? Maybe they would be cohesively if they were the same.
Yeah, that was what my thought was.
It's charming. I think it's fun.
Yeah, they feel like really like, again, I don't know why I'm using food analogies, but they feel like marshmallows to me. But I would definitely play with what the cutout of the negative space within the internal sections of the letters is, whether they're consistent or not. And in some, you may need to make slightly different just so we can notice it, but it won't be noticeable to most eyes that they actually are different. The L feels a little alien to me. It feels like the base is a little too big. You know what I mean? Like, and then the P and the R. Look at the bowl on the top. It's shifted, but it's significantly shifted. Right. So the proportion of the top to the bottom of the letter. I wonder if you want to maintain those more similar. I wonder if the Q, the leg of the Q, has a different angle, or if it's just like a little slight dent.
Yeah, that's probably from the pen trying to figure out, like, they don't really have guide. Like, once I start drawing with the pen, it's hard to see if those two are parallel. Right. So it's more with my eye, but yeah, I agree. It looks like it kind of cuts in too sharp.
Right. I also wonder the eye, if there is a really fat version of the eye that's really cool. Yeah. That will even it out a little more. Because, the J and the L have sort of the horizontal strokes that are going to take the space. But I think these are looking like they're a family, right? Oh, look at the F and the E, right? Does the middle stroke become similar in the F? Yeah. From the E. So just those little like slight angles, but there's things that you're doing like where the space is on the D in relation to where it's on the Q or the O, so we can distinguish that they're different letters. They're not in the same space. So that shift is nice, so you can see that this is an O and this is a D. It's not an O on an O, or maybe it's a D, right? So things like that. I think those adjustments I think are really nice. And I would also start looking at the height, because as I'm looking at it now, like it looks like they're different heights.
Yeah, they all are, just because when I drew it out, they became different sizes. Right. For my grid, I accidentally messed up. So yeah, I need to go through and just make sure they're all uniform in their actual size.
Okay, good. So I think you can make those adjustments. But I mean, playing around, it's magic. Again, the pen tool is just like tricky. So everybody just...
Yeah, and I didn't utilize Pathfinder tool at all, so I'll have to look into that.
You have a set of letters perfect for Pathfinder.
Yeah, I was gonna say I was gonna say you could just like make squares and round the corners and just copy and paste that basically.
Yeah.
I was super impressed that you did it all with the pen tool, having never used Illustrator before.
Yeah.
I was very frustrated. I went to bed like, oh my god, I want to kill myself right now. But I woke up with a fresh slate and figured it out in a couple hours.
That's good. Yeah, nice.
Are there some tutorials on the Pathfinder tool? I didn't see any that were shared. I would love.
I sent you on that little conversation you sent me last night. I sent you one. It hasn't changed.
Okay, I'll
but
check
you
it
can
out.
find tons of them. It's super simple, and a lot of the way I learned it was by just playing around with geometric figures, shapes, and just starting to play.
Okay.
And sometimes I use it in a way that I forget what they are, and I just start because I'm trying to make new things or trying to so cool.
Is that posted to the general Slack?
It's not. It's just between us two, but I can share it. Or
Freddie, can you share it? Can you post it out there? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, because I feel nervous about the Pathfinder tool.
Yeah.
You can also look on YouTube and do using Pathfinder tool in Illustrator. There will be a tons
of resources. Okay.
Yeah, tons of them.
Okay.
So anyway, so good. So you all know sort of like directions to go for here. So what I want to do really briefly is just I want to show you project number 2, which will unlock this evening at 5, by the way. And I'm going to show you here. So project 2, there's references. I have put an oodles of references on here. Lots of posters. What I would say to you, keep in mind that some of these posters have pictures. You're not using pictures in your posters. Okay? So it's all typographically led. So you have to think about composition, and you have to think about how you're going to arrange and how you're going to arrange the information. Keep in mind this is about your favorite candy. Okay? So it could be, these are not advertisements. Okay, you're not making ads for candy. You are making a poster. So it could be that you say, I'm going to make a poster about the history of this candy. I'm going to make a poster about the nutritional information about this candy. I'm going to make a poster about, I remember reading a piece somewhere about this candy, how this is made. So you go and find that writing, and then you start using a section of it. It could be that the posters are a timeline of when this candy was created, but you're not creating an ad for it. Does that make sense? So you're giving us some sort of information that you really like about this. You're thinking, what's the idea? Again, for example, you can start thinking, okay, so I love sugar daddies, and sugar daddies to me remind me of the stickiness in my teeth. So the whole idea of this poster is like playing around with that idea of the stickiness in your teeth. So how do I get that? How does that manifest? How do I manifest that idea on a poster through space? Maybe all the letters are really tightly spaced, right? So that you get this idea of this candy stuck in your tooth. It's not literal necessarily. It's mostly conceptual. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're gonna have to. You can basically, if you want to, you can go online and do research. You can go to the manufacturer of the candy. You can go to Wikipedia and just get some basic information. You can find out, like, I don't know, the New Yorker, is there a story that, talks about this candy, and I just want to use that one paragraph from that novel that talks about this writers with this candy. So you're going to have to use large display copy, which is going to be primarily the letters that you design, and then secondary copy, which you are going to be able to use either Courier, Arial, or Times New Roman, which should appear in all of your computers because they're standard typefaces. Okay? But like the main typographic vocabulary of this assignment is your typefaces that you're designing. Got it? So on Slack here, I put principles of composition. I put some typographic posters, a brief overview. I also put a video that I made about composition and type review, reviewing type and composition. So that's there. There's also a video on setting your document in InDesign. But one thing that I want you to do is I want you to actually just work in Illustrator for the poster, and then we'll jump to InDesign for the third assignment. Does that make sense? So you're going to have to set a document up. They're 11 by 17 posters. You have to make 5 this week. So you're playing out your idea in 5 posters. Each one is distinctly different. You're playing 5 different ideas. You're not going to ultimately make 5 posters, but you're just sort of sketching ideas on these 5 posters. Does that make sense?
Sketching them digitally?
Yeah, you're making 5 posters, 11 by 17. Yeah. I want to see 5 posters, 11 by 17, that you've made in Illustrator next week. Don't give me a thumbnail sketch by hand. I don't want to see it. I want to see you futz around with typography, the letter forms, content, starting to think about composition, starting to figure out how you arrange things, starting to think about hierarchy, what's the order, what's the hook, how do I get people moving around the composition to get them engaged, and how do I create this idea that I have in my head using typography. Does that
part we're creating new typography for each 5 ideas?
No, you're presenting, you have an idea, you're making 5 ideations of it. So if I ask you, we need to make a poster, I need you to give me 20 ideas for that poster. So you're making 5.
Okay, but are we creating a new typeface for?
No, you're using your typeface that you have created.
Okay, for the weeks up to now.
Up to now, yes. So now you're using these letter forms that you've been creating. Now you're going to actually use them in your poster. For a secondary typeface, because you have to have content, you can use either Arial, or you can use Courier, or you can use Times New Roman, one of those. But the main typographic voice of this poster is the letter forms that you're creating. So that simply means do not put a 300-point size Courier C in your poster. That C should be in your letter forms. Okay. So I just did a Google search of candy. So here's some candy inspiration, yo. Hey, candy. Pick 1 candy. Don't pick 12. Okay, and here's some examples of posters and compositions and sort of arrangements and organization of information and how people use different shapes that they've created and identities and different posters. This is Carl Narut again, how you develop systems to organize information. Here is the PDF of that presentation of composition and type review that I did the video up above, so you can have it. It's my handwriting. I did this, I didn't feel like digitizing it. I was like, I can do this better by hand, and I've always kept it by hand. It's so dorky. But sort of talking about traditional composition and compositions and more modern compositions, and then talking about basic of type review. Does that make sense?
Can it be in color, or does it have to be
No, black and white, no color. Stay away from color.
There are some like examples with horizontal lines or vertical lines, just black strokes. Is that something we should stay away from?
Like, which example are you saying, vertical, horizontal lines?
Oh, that one right there with the type item CNC, the third one on your screen.
This one here, the pink one? This here?
Heidelberg, that one.
This here. You can do whatever you want to do.
Oh, so like the underline thing, those lines.
You mean these underlines? Yeah, you can do that. Why? That's just all about, like, literally, this is literally showing you a Heidelberg press, how you print. That's literally what they were going for. That's actually a stamp. That's not a poster, by the way.
Interesting.
Yeah, so, this is Ed Fella doing, vernacular letters that he finds when he's traveling, and he just doodles them and then makes them, right? I'm not trying to be like, oh, this is like the modernist and there's a grid and you need to organize everything. I want you to start thinking more organically to how you're starting to see things. This is Paris, right? If you take that picture, this poster still looks incredible because of the letter forms that they create. And they create a lot of letter forms that's unique just for like things like titles. That's all they do. Here's just literally talking about composition, how you organize information, 2 different typefaces, right? Obviously, look, there's a 2-column grid here, right down the middle, right? The scale, how you use scale, size, to help us look at the information. This is Paula Scher for the Public Theater. Shakespeare in the Park. Let's see. Yale Architecture Posters. This is Sulkian Min. This is a Swiss poster that I found that I think is really beautiful. Right? If you take the pictures out, you still have a really interesting poster with the use of negative space and the size of the type. And you organize it. This is Sulkian Min again. These fabulous letter forms, and look how all the information is ranged. Right? Another Paris. This is Carl Nerut. I don't know who did this, but this is for Nike. I really like that. See? Just the organization, the scale between the big type and the little tiny type, and then the logo. But you don't need to use the logo, by the way. Do not use the logo for these candies. So pretty much this, you're seeing it right now, is in what's going to open today at 5, so compositions. And some of this I've replicated on the Slack because I feel like on Slack it's better. And then here's basically the assignment. You're making 5 11 by 17 black and white posters. And you can play, again, if you say I'm doing sugar daddies, my idea really is to play around with the idea of stickiness and how it sticks to your teeth. And I have my content, and I'm going to start playing, ideating on that idea of stickiness and how each poster plays with that idea differently. And then I just put those 5 up. Does that make sense? Great. Fabulous. Awesome. Questions? Everybody's good. So again, you're going to take those letter forms that you've created, and you may need to make adjustments based on critique just for the poster. It wouldn't be surprising also that the letter forms morph a little bit because you're like, ooh, there's something that I want to add to the letter forms because now I have content for this poster. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Really, you got to start thinking about composition, how you organize information, and how you concept an idea for a poster. Get it across typographically through use of space, how you organize it, so forth and so on. All right? Yep. I'm going to go back. I'm going to stop showing you my screen for a second just to say, all right, cool. So are we all good? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you all for hanging out. It was a little longer than I normally want them to be, but we got through everybody and looking at critiques. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to put this video up, but then I'm going to show you how to do I'm going to do a little video on step and repeat and show you how to look at squares, like how to square the edges. So I'll do a little illustrated video and I'll upload it onto the Slack. And then just make sure that you look at the references for project number 2. Okay? Cool?
Sounds good.
All right. So I look forward to seeing what everybody does. Have fun. All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.